Hello, gentle viewers. This is Avindian welcoming you to a brand new series with Victoria 2 Heart of Darkness and the A House Divided expansions. So Victoria 2 is an older Paradox game from 2013 that takes you through 100 years of history. Ironically, well, not ironically, it was intentional. So intentionally based roughly around the life of Queen Victoria of England. It's not called Victoria 2 because it's about Victoria II, who doesn't exist yet. It's called Victoria 2 because there's an earlier game called Victoria, an Empire Under the Sun. We're going to be playing as Prussia, but before we dive in, I wanted to make just a couple of quick notifications about the way we're going to be playing this game. Because this is intended to be a tutorial, I'm going to cover every single thing I do, even stuff I would normally do off camera. So if at any point I do something and you don't understand why I do it, please make sure to remind me in the comments, or poke me on Twitter, or on the Paradox forums or something. Just because I want to make sure this is a good experience for people who've never played the game. Unlike Hearts of Iron 4, even if you don't watch my videos, you can probably figure out Hearts of Iron 4 and have reasonable success. Victoria 2 is from an era in which the learning curve was very much steeper than any of the new Paradox games, beginning with Crusader Kings 2. And while it's an awesome game, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to follow, so I'm going to go a little bit more slowly than I normally would. And I specifically am going to pick a country where we'll get into wars, but we won't get into as many of them, and we won't need to go to war. And that country is called the Kingdom of Prussia. So a few things should pop up right away. First of all, the world is a very strange but interesting looking place. And a lot of the map, particularly in Africa, is gray. That's because this is yet to be colonized. And this is a big part of the game, and particularly in the last third. So let's explain what we can on this screen before we even begin the game. There are two different scenarios. One begins with the American Civil War, A House Divided. I'll be perfectly honest, as much as I love Victoria 2, the second scenario is kind of garbage. It has nothing to do with Paradox's fault, though. The very nature of the way Victoria 2 works, there's just a shit ton of research you have to do to make the game work, which they did mostly, but mostly it sucks because the major change it added, which is being able to play as the Confederacy. I'm just changing as I show this. This is a fool's gambit. I have never won as the Confederacy in the American Civil War, and the rest of the world is more or less the same. There are other subtle differences, but to be honest, the formation of Italy. So if you want to play as Italy, 1861 is a good start. Let's see, is there any other big changes? No, because Italy fought Austria in 1859. I mean, you get supersized Colombia, so that's fun. Actually, that is the normal size of Colombia. It's just Colombia plus Panama. But we're not going to play that particular scenario. And then if we go over here, you'll notice everything else looks almost exactly the same. Just like more like the interior of Canada is colonized and stuff like that. So, you'll notice the music quit, by the way. That was partially intentional on my part. Do let me know if during these videos you hear the music being really, really loud. So, we've already got a lot of information on this screen, and all of it is stuff we need to talk about. Unlike most other Paradox games, part of Victoria 2 is keeping score. What do I mean by keeping score? Every country in the game gets 3 scores. Prestige, represented by the star. Factories, or industry, represented by the factory. My wife, when we used to play Axis and Oz, called these snails. I know I can't not see them as snails, so maybe I'll call them snails. And then your military score, represented by the cross blades. These three together determine whether you are considered a great power, which unlocks a whole host of possible options for you in the diplomatic game that we'll talk about once we actually load up the game. A secondary power aspiring to be a great power, which so the top 8 are the great powers, the next 8 are the secondary powers, which includes countries like Sweden and Belgium and the Netherlands and the two Sicilies and the different Italian states. Moldavia is 16, that won't last. Actually, this is, I think, sorted by prestige, not by total score. Because there's no way in hell Moldavia is... Yeah, Moldavia is 29th. They have you ranked 16th by prestige. So this is a useful feature. You can sort and say, this is the kind of country I'd like to play as. But we're going to go ahead and pick Prussia because that's what we already decided on. Prussia is strong enough that we're not really in danger of like failing outright. But it's going to be competitive enough that there's going to be a lot of interesting wars in Central Europe. That'll generally be quite short. And we can really get involved in the diplomatic game in a big, big way. So I think that'll make for a much more enjoyable experience than if I pick some of the other countries. Other countries I do recommend to people playing the game, especially if you're playing for the very first time. There is a Victoria 2 tutorial. It's not super great, but it will teach you the basics of clicking on here does this, clicking on here does that. It doesn't explain the systems really well, but it does explain the basics of how to play the game. And in that tutorial, they actually have you play as Belgium. Belgium is not a bad choice by any means. There's tremendous possibility for industrial improvement. You can become a great power as Belgium, or the Netherlands for that matter, even though you don't start the game as one, just because of how much potential there is in your land. Another good country to start the game as is the USA. The USA is pretty much immune from anything other than the British Empire at the beginning of the game. Nothing else is really something to be afraid of. You will go to war with Mexico, and that's a nice, bigger sized war, which a competent player should be able to handle quite easily. There's Texas. That's where I live. Hooray! Argentina. So the very first time I ever played Victoria 2, I played Argentina, and Argentina is a good choice as well. Ironically, I'm going to recommend against ever playing as the British Empire. This is for two main reasons. The biggest reason is it's just so big and difficult to manage. This goes to Russia too, by the way. Although Russia, it's not quite as extreme. There's so much to manage that it's just not fun. I tried playing the British Empire, and it's basically playing the game on easy mode. You can pretty much do whatever you want. But, especially when you get to Rebel Whack-A-Mole later on in the game, it's very frustrating playing as the British Empire. For me, maybe your experience is different. There are mods for Victoria 2 that can break free the largest people as dominions. And if I were going to play the British Empire, that's what I would do. I would make Canada Dominion. I would make South Africa Dominion. I would make India Dominion. I know historically and Australia Dominion. Historically, these weren't dominions for quite a while yet. Canada was, but none of the others were. Because South Africa becomes one after the Boer War. Australia might become one a little sooner than, and India doesn't become doesn't even become a dominion potentially until the 1920s. And then later on, it just has to declare independence outright. So I generally don't recommend playing as the British, unless you have a lot of time on your hands and are willing to go through the time and effort it will take to make Britain a thing. Britain's a good country to pick for colonizing, though. France is a fun country to play if you want to focus pretty heavily on colonizing. You'll get into colonial wars with the British. It'll be interesting if you play as France. I do recommend France. But France, again, is playing a little bit on easy mode compared to a lot of these other countries. Austria is one of my favorite countries to play if I want a challenge. If I weren't doing this as a tutorial, I might play as Austria. Because Austria is pretty strong, but is weak in a lot of fundamental ways that mean Austria is typically not going to be a great power for very long. unless managed by a very competent player. Same thing for the Ottoman Empire, by the way, to an even greater degree. Technically, Egypt should sort of start the game. When did Egypt actually get independence? 1821 is when Muhammad Ali rose up against the Ottoman Empire, but I remember if he was granted independence or just became like a satrap. I don't recall. Forgive me. But yeah, Ottoman Empire is like, of the great powers, they're the hardest one to win. Spain is enjoyable for colonizing. I kind of wish Victoria II started in the 1820s, because then you'd get to fight the wars of independence in Latin America, all of which are pretty much done by the time Victoria II starts. But, you know, you have to make choices. Japan is an amazingly fun game. I did that as an AAR and had a blast. China is too. They spent some time introducing new mechanics for China. I've never actually played as China. I will play as China eventually, but I haven't yet. The reason I haven't played as China, and I won't play as China in this playthrough, of course, is the fact that, again, it's just too big to manage. China and Japan almost always become great powers by the end of the game, which happened in real life, too. China fought the British unsuccessfully in the Opium Wars, but the sheer size and power of China was such that it couldn't really be denied. Japan defeated both China and Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. 1904 or 1905, technically. And that also presented an interesting country. Unlike other Paradox games, you really can't go wrong with about 90% of the countries in the game. If you play in Southeast Asia, you get to have a lot of wars of conquest over places like Aceh and Johor. If you play in Europe, you're going to have a lot of things to do in your hands. You could play Sweden and try to form Scandinavia, which actually isn't that hard. There's lots of things you could do. Lots and lots of things you could do. But we're going to be playing as Prussia. Anything else on the screen I should explain? Pops we'll get into. Oh, we are not China, we are Prussia. Pops we'll get into when we start the game. This tells you your breakdown. We have no wars, we have no allies, we have no puppets. So let's actually play the game. Because you're probably tired of hearing me talk right now, you'd actually like to see the game. So right away, the first thing you're going to want to do is change your map mode to political map mode. And this is Victoria 2. You'll notice the art style is very old compared to what you're used to in other games from Paradox. And there's a lot going on this screen that we're going to have to take quite a bit of time to decide. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to do message settings. This is one of those boring parts of Victoria 2, but it has to be done. Because if you don't do this, you won't learn important information. So we can designate every country in the world as either interesting or not. And we'll set that here a little bit later on. But we need to know when certain things happen so we can set the game to pause automatically and so we don't miss important stuff. Combat. Yes, if we gain... Actually, this might have kept my message settings. Did it keep my message settings? I really hope it did. We might actually just play the game and see how this works out. It did. Perfect. Yeah. So I will give you just a couple of quick highlights of things you need to make sure you do. So the first button here, it puts it in the message log, which is at the bottom of the screen. It puts it in the map. It comes as a pop-up, or it goes in your little message icons. And this actually pauses the game as well. I've built these messages so that it pauses during the most important stuff. And then we just need to set who we consider interesting, which we do here. Always want your neighbors to be considered interesting. We'll say everyone else in Europe. Okay, Egypt is not part of Europe, but okay. I'd like to know what's happening with the USA. And the rest of these countries just aren't that interesting to us right now. They might become interesting later on, but right now they're not that interesting. And so you don't want to overcrowd it. Always want to make sure that your entire sphere is in there. So, a lot of information on this screen. Some of this is easy to understand. Some of it, frankly, isn't. Please tell me factories are disabled. Okay, this is getting turned off. We don't care who's actually building what factories, and I'll explain why in a minute here. You'll notice actually getting some alliance offers, and we'll talk about that when we get to diplomacy. But the first thing we need to talk about is just a quick look at the map and the different countries. So here we are, we're the lovely Prussian dark blue. In earlier versions of Victoria 2, Prussia was gray. Gray is Prussia's standard color, and it's almost indistinguishable from Austrian white, which is kind of a problem since they're almost always going to be at loggerheads, as the British say. So each one of these is an army. We've got a fairly good-sized army. But you'll notice our borders are extremely ugly. We'll be fixing this, not momentarily, but before too much time in the game has passed. So we won't talk about army composition just yet. We're going to start with each item here on the tab and move from left to right. So this is our country score. We are a great power, as all the top 8 countries are. We've got a fair bit of prestige. Prestige is only really gained by either winning battles or by getting technology. Other things will boost prestige too, like certain events. But prestige is generally something used at the beginning of the game. Very quickly into the game, you'll discover that prestige doesn't matter a whole lot. You also get prestige just for being a great power, which helps you hold your spot. Industrial power. So this is how many factories you have and the total value of the goods that you export. You'll notice we have a few country flags in this. This is because they're in our sphere, which is really important, but for now, we'll leave for a bit later on. And then finally, your leaders, your army, and your navy will all feed into military power. Prussia starts with a very tiny navy, which I'm pretty sure is literally just a couple of transports, and none of these are worth military power. So that's why you don't see navies on there. This last one was added in Heart of Darkness, and this is how much time and effort you can spend on colonizing. We're Prussia. There's nowhere within our range to colonize. This won't matter to us, maybe at all. So I'm going to set that to the side. But if you're playing as France or Spain, you're going to definitely want to maximize this number so you can expand your empire through colonization. Now, what is a great power? The top 8 countries in the game are great powers, and the great powers have the ability to influence other nations to join their sphere, which is a political and economic agreement. Spheres are incredibly important in Victoria 2, because they're a way to expand your nation's influence without fighting a war, or becoming any weaker, or without fighting a war, or actually expanding your territory. In some cases, your sphere will expand, and in Prussia's case, it definitely will, but not normally. So, if 2 nations are in a sphere agreement, one has to be a great power. The first aspect of the game, the first aspect is that the sphere the person who's being sphered, it's really confusing, and I'm tired of saying the word sphere already. What I used to call these? Spherelings. That's what we called them. Spherelings, which are people that are within your sphere of influence. So the great power has an automatic alliance with them. They'll also want you to sign an alliance with them, but that's just merely a formality. You don't have to if you don't want to. You'll be called into their wars if someone attacks them, and you can call them into your wars. That's one aspect. The other aspect is economic. Now, this is a subject of some controversy among Victoria 2 players, and I'm going to give you my take on it, which has been confirmed by certain devs in the past. I could very well be wrong, but your ranking in the world from 1 to like 193 affects your access to goods on the world market. It is not by prestige, it is by total score. For the longest time, people believed it was by prestige, and that may have even been true in previous versions of Victoria 2. It is entirely by your world ranking. Now, you get 100% of the access to your own goods, unless you're in a sphere. If you're in a sphere, depending on how industrialized you are, you give a certain percentage of your goods to your overlord, and the rest you get to keep. But as long as you're independent, 100% of the stuff you produce goes to you first, to meet your population's needs, to meet building stuff, all the other things in the game. But every other good goes out on the world market. And access to the market is controlled by your total score. As Prussia, we are number 4, which means that, off the top of my head, it's Britain, France, and Russia, I think, are 1, 2, and 3. Oh, it's Britain, Russia, and France. I was close, though. We'll talk more about this screen later on. This just to show you what they look like. So Britain and France and Russia will get anything that we don't make, that our feelings don't make, they'll get it first. For certain goods in the game, and you may not have noticed this unless you really know your geography and your geology well. Why did I mention a bunch of countries specifically? If you do not have coal, you will be royally screwed in the early part of the game. Because as countries industrialize, they'll all start using more and more and more coal. And if you don't have a native source of it, and you're not the British Empire, the British are going to take most of the coal on the market. You can survive without coal, but it's really, really hard. This is equally true for oil later on in the game, and rubber later on in the game. Although you're not totally screwed if you don't have oil or rubber. Germany has coal, but not oil or rubber, and that'll be something we'll have to focus on later on. Maybe the second or third, it's the second half of the game. We'll want to try to get some kind of colony that, because I've played this game before, I know is likely to end up with oil. Because there is no oil at the beginning of the game, it's revealed later on. So yeah, that's why your prestige score matters. Now, the good news is, it's relatively easy to become a great power if you know what you're doing. But it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee. And it's especially difficult for westernizing nations, which are nations that don't start the game as Western nations, like Japan and China and a few others. But they use the sphere agreement to their own advantage. So sphering is actually good for both parties, or can be good for both parties. Because this means, as Prussia, if I don't use all of my coal, my spherelings get first crack at the remaining coal. So this means that one of your only ways to get coal, if you're not a country that owns it, is to try to get in the sphere of someone who does. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but that's a fundamental mechanic of the game and the way it works. You need access to certain goods to have a powerful economy. And coal is one of them. Let's talk about the production screen. So these are all the things the country... there's a few tabs here, but we're going to focus on this one for now. These are the factories we have in the game. Right now, we have a glass factory, an ammunition factory, a small arms factory, a paper factory, a fabric factory, an explosives factory, and an artillery factory. All of these things either serve pop needs, we need them to make, or they act as military support. One of the first things you're going to want to master in Victoria 2 is which factories to build, where to build them, and when to build them. So we'll actually be changing our political party because our current party doesn't allow us to build factories. We will be changing that. Another reason I picked Prussia, by the way. So, this is what's required to make what it is that you want to make. So, in this case, to make glass, we need coal. You need people to work in the factories. Craftsmen do most of the work. Clerks basically add an efficiency bonus. They work in the factory too, but clerks are there for adding efficiency. You really want craftsmen. As the factory fills up, you can expand the factory, and the AI will expand the the industry on its own, but you can also choose to pay to expand it using some of your money. And because Victoria, it's all in pounds. You also need goods to build factories. So you see, we need iron, cement, and machine parts. Now, how do factories work? So this is how much money we're earning. Not how much we're making, how much money we're earning by selling our goods on the open market. Which is actually pretty good. But Victoria 2 is a game of numbers, and we're going to have to really dig into one of the maybe less fun aspects of Victoria 2, which is understanding all of these crazy numbers we're seeing here. So, why did we only produce... because of throughput. Right. Okay. So, your output is based on your base times your throughput times your output. And these are all things that you need to know. So, every factory has a base efficiency, a base production of workers. So clerks improve your base efficiency, technology improves your base efficiency, and the existence of railroads improves it. Throughput comes from your craftsmen. So your base is, this is how much you'll make if nothing else happens. So your base output is 18. So we would do 18 times 100% for the base, and we get a few bonuses for that. Times the throughput, and the throughput will really drag you down quite a bit. In this case, because the factory isn't fully employed. We've only got about 20% of the workforce there, and so it'll never make as much as it could. Technology affects throughput, infrastructure affects throughput, and you get a bonus if there's synergy. So if you're building glass in a factory in a state that has coal, you'll make more glass. You'll get a bonus to throughput. And the output efficiency mostly comes from tech. There's other ways to get output efficiency too, but that's a big one. So right now the glass factory is only operating at roughly 25% capacity. Actually a little bit less than 25%. Yeah, a little less than 25%. And that's mostly because the factory's not full. So what do the other buttons on here do? You can set the priority, which tells the game, hire people to fill this factory first. I want to make sure we've got lots and lots and lots of people working in the glass factory. You can subsidize a factory, which means if a factory isn't making enough money, if it's not profitable, instead of closing, they take money from your treasury. And then finally, you can choose to close a factory. What you can and can't do with factories depends largely on your political party, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. These are all the things you can or ever will make in the game. So some things aren't available at the beginning of the game, like telephones and cars and radios and oil, or fuel, excuse me. Oil is a little teardrop. There we go. Foreign investment. This is a way to strengthen your relations with your spherelings. I could go to Anhalt, who's in my sphere, and I could offer, let's see here. Oh, I can't spend. I wonder if my government will let me spend here. That's a shame. So 75% of all of their resources become available to me. And that will change the more we invest. You'll never get 100%, but you will get more. The production tab. So this is a really tremendous screen for getting a quick overview about what you're making or what you're trying to make. And this is all the goods in the game, excluding the ones that aren't unlocked. Actually, I know it is literally all the goods, okay. So, our craftsmen are making ammunition. We've got other craftsmen making small arms. We've got artillery that's being manufactured. We've got canned goods. This is being made by artisans, and we'll talk about artisans when we talk about pops. So this tells you how much stuff you're making each and every single day. It also tells you how much is sold domestically, in other words, what stays in the country, and then what's sold on the world market. So right now, it should be painfully obvious why I chose Prussia. It's this number right here. We're one of the world's leading producers of coal. And we absolutely cannot have an industrialized society without coal. We also produce a fair bit of iron, a fair bit of timber. We've got people making steel and cement. We'll obviously want to make that in factories. We've got glass making. We've got fabric making. We make liquor, wine, wheat, also very important. Fruit, very important. Fish, cattle, and paper. So this is what we're making. If it's grayed out, we're not making it. And so some of these things are things we're going to want to acquire elsewhere. But we could also just buy them on the open market. Like cotton, for example. Prussia doesn't make it, but it's super easy to make cotton. It's super easy to find cotton. Until the U.S. Civil War. And even then, as long as we have good relations with the USA, we'll just kind of have to suffer and not have cotton for a while. And then the British will eventually start unlocking more cotton in Egypt. One of the rarest things to find is dyes. That's this one here. It always looks to me like the one is throwing up. You either need to build dye, which is an advanced as an advanced tech to build a dye factory, or you need to just have it. Dye is almost impossible to find on the market, but it generally doesn't affect things too terribly much, because I think the only thing you use dye for is luxury clothing. I don't think anything else is used for dye. I'd have to take a quick look. We can't build factories right now. Oh, these buttons up here. You can subsidize everything, unsubsidize everything, open all factories, or close all factories. Projects. So within your nation are capitalists. And capitalists have their own desires about what they want to build. And in this case, capitalists want to build a factory. They don't have enough goods, and they don't have enough money. We could actually give them the money if we want to. Or we can just have the capitalists sort it out for themselves. Another controversial thing I'm going to say. It is almost always better, once you establish your economy and gotten it up and running, to let the liberals take it over. In previous versions of Victoria 2, the AI for capitalists was absolutely god-awful. And it's still not great at building an economy now. But it's really good at growing an economy. And as the game progresses, we'll see this will fill up. Capitalists will build things like railroads. They'll invest in more factories. They'll expand factories. And then depending on your government, you can choose whether or not you want to invest in it. In this case, a fabric factory is not super thrilling. We've already got one actually in the North Rhine. I don't know why they want to build another one. But early in the game, any factory is a good factory. We're definitely going to want to take control of the economy, though, and build very specific factories as soon as we possibly can. We need cement factories, badly. And we'll talk about why shortly. So that's the production tab. You'll be spending a fair bit of time here. The budget tab. This is another big part of the game. This is how you determine if your economy is making money or losing money. Now, so you tax your people based on their pop level. All pops are considered either poor, middle class, or rich. I would have actually said lower, middle, and upper, but that's just me. Gold automatically generates income and turns into treasury. So the different pops are grouped into this, and you can increase the tax rate. But, like real life, tax rates aren't at 100% efficiency. Tax efficiency comes from technology and from, I believe, bureaucrats increase tax efficiency as well. So this means that even though their tax rate is 50%, only 11% of that actually ends up in our pocket. Which is really crappy, obviously. What happens to the rest of the money? That's a great question. That's never really been answered satisfactorily. Does it go back to the pops? Does it just vanish like a fart in the wind? What happens to it? I honestly can't tell you. I don't know. So this is the only real way to gain income, is to get more people and have them pay higher taxes. Or make your tax collection more efficient. This tells you about your population's needs. Life needs mean the pop continues to grow. Everyday needs means they're pretty happy. Artisans aren't getting any of their needs. This is a bug that's happening because the game is paused and the factories haven't started working yet. And then there's also luxury needs, which a tiny sliver are actually getting met. Come on. There we go. Luxury needs make them very, very happy. If they're getting their everyday needs, they're not happy, they're not unhappy. If they don't get their life needs, they get really pissed off. So what do you spend your treasury income on? First and foremost, you spend it on your military. In this case, we're spending most of it on building up our stockpile. This will drop off. Once our stockpile is full, we won't need to spend quite so much on it anymore. So you can see right there, the problem is ammunition is extremely expensive right now because we need a lot of it. And you can set the size of that for the Army, for the Navy, and for construction. Any construction that we're doing, and right now everything's set at 100%. Education, this affects how quickly you get research points. And it also pays the salary of your clergy. So you can always get it back from them through taxes. You can click on this and it tells you what people are suffering at. Your clerks. Shut up. Administration is bureaucracy. You need a certain level of administrative efficiency in order to collect tariffs and other things. So this does affect how much money you're able to gain. And again, their salary is paid directly by how much you allocate. Social spending at the beginning of the game doesn't exist, but you can pass certain political reforms that make your population happy. It helps them achieve certain things they would otherwise not be able to. And we'll talk about that when we get to the reform screen. Finally, you pay the military, both the soldiers and the officers. So you'll notice that 100% of this doesn't immediately go to pay them. It also goes to paying maintenance on your existing army stuff. And then there are tariffs. Tariffs are an important source of revenue. Basically meaning whenever we pay something, whenever we import something, we charge tariffs on it. Now I'm going to warn you of something very important that not a lot of people understand about economics. A lot of players will spend a lot of time using tariffs to gain money. This is phenomenally stupid unless you're Britain. Because the tariffs are going to screw over your artisans, and I'll talk about why in a minute. More importantly, they're going to make it more expensive for you to buy the stuff that you need. So unless you're self-sufficient or close to it, tariffs are going to hurt you in other ways. Your factories will have to pay more in order to produce the stuff you want them to make. Tariffs are very good for short-term increases to income, but they're not so great for long-term. If your long-term strategy is based on tariffs, you're going to be screwed. As it happens, we need to do something to balance this budget. Because right now we're going to be losing 317 pounds every day. We've only got 12,000 in the bank. And we're going to need a lot of money to help build up our factories. You can always take loans, and loans can actually countries can take loans from you too, and you can get interest from that, which is pretty cool. For now, we're going to cut back on our army stockpile. We're going to put it down here. The Navy, by the way, has a minimum. Yeah, I will happily cut that back. Construction, we wanted 100%. The rest of this is fine for now. We're going to spend a little bit less on the military in general. Because our army doesn't need to be super huge right now. Although, I don't really want I don't really want people to not want to spend it. Oh, we're jingoists, which means we can spend the max amount. Maybe we actually will use... Oh, wow, no one's buying our shit. Oh, yeah, we could have 100% tariffs, which would be really stupid. We need to increase taxes. which isn't great, but it's going to be the only way we're going to make up this deficit. Let's put the poor on 65. Middle class on 55. Let's just put them all on 65, actually, and see what we have to do from there. As we improve tax efficiency, and especially as the economy gets going, we'll be able to start cutting back taxes drastically. But we need to make sure we have a positive balance. Which means taxing the ever-loving shit out of the poor. Because they're your major source of income. Now, as the game progresses, and as you get more and more capitalists and aristocrats, you can start gouging them. It's a wonderful way. Okay, even with 100% taxes, we're not going to be making money. So let's just try to reduce the amount we lose. And let's give you 70%. And we'll start to see this change pretty drastically as the game progresses. So we've put a dent in the deficit. And it's not like taking loans out is the end of the world, but I'd rather not do that if we don't have to. We'll also have the National Bank. Your pops will actually put some of their money in savings that you can actually borrow against. So you can take, so your loan will always come from your national bank first, which actually means you pay the interest to your own pops, which is a good way to get them money. It's not very much because it's divided equally among all people. I don't think it's based on investment. It should be, but I don't think it is. That's the budget screen. Don't worry, we won't be in the red for very long. Another big part of this is, like, artisans haven't sold anything yet, so they have no income, which means we're not getting any tax revenue from them. That'll change. Now let's talk about technology. Technology is generated by clergymen and clerics, but mostly clergymen, which is increased as your literacy improves and as your as other things in here change your tech as well. So we get 21.7 research points every single day, and then we decide how we want to spend them. All techs in the game are divided into 5 categories: Army, Navy, Commerce, Culture, and Industry. You can hold, I believe, a month's worth of research without penalty. But you're usually going to want to spend it as soon as you can. So right now we have a certain school called the Military Industrial Complex, which gives a bonus to the military, a penalty to the Navy, a penalty to culture, and a boost to industry. Most great powers start with the first tier of techs unlocked, which lets you do things like build forts, build infantry, build artillery, build cavalry, and do these wonderful things here, which we'll talk about more when we get into the military. I know we haven't even unpaused the game yet, but there's a lot of information to digest, so forgive me if this episode's a bit more boring. I highly recommend you ask me questions if you have any in the comments or through Twitter so that I can cover things in the next episode. And so what you'll do is you'll pick a tech. Now we're experiencing like other games, you cannot research certain techs before you reach a certain time period. Culture, by the way, is where most of the prestige-generating techs are. We can also improve our research. We will be able to when we've unlocked idealism, which we can't do until 1840. We can improve our education efficiency, which is how quickly our clergy make people literate, and therefore increase our research points. We can have national focuses. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. Until we have this school, we're kind of wasting time if we go, But positivism. Positivism. I was originally going to go for some of these industry techs, which are all really, really good. Medicine. So in addition to techs, there's also inventions. Let's take a look at one. Right now, none of my inventions can be unlocked because I don't need them. Let's take a look at something like experimental railroad, which doesn't have a medicine. So you get the tech, and then over time, these different things will be increased. And it tells you what's unlocked to give you a different boost to different things. I'm not going to go over individual aspects of this right now. We'll talk about it when we make tech decisions. So I'm thinking of 3 possibilities. Possibility one is experimental railroad, because we want to be able to build railroads as soon as we can. They increase our infrastructure, they make our armies move faster, and they make our factories more productive. We could go for clean coal, which will improve our coal production, and our iron production, which is also very good. We could also boost other things like throughput or just output for mining. Railroad is the first tech I would choose. But like any game that has technology, you want to get research buffs as soon as you can possibly get them. And positivism is the way to do that at this point in the game. It's not a flat increase to it's not a flat increase to research points. Instead, it tries to entice people to migrate to your colonies, which doesn't matter because we don't have any. But it makes clergy turn literacy into research points much more efficiently. Or it makes people literate more quickly. And so I think we're actually going to go and just take positivism. I like to pick army techs early on too, especially in like muzzle-loaded rifles. But we're going to take or a commerce tech. We're going to take positivism. Click on it. You click start. It's going to cost us 8,000 points because we're being penalized. And this will fill up each and every day. And it says we'll complete this in 2 years. Which isn't great, but it's the way we are right now. As our literacy improves, that'll be fixed. Do I really want to max out the clergy budget? How much would that cost me? We can't afford it right now. We will be able to later. We'll talk about it later. Now, politics. Politics is an amazing part of Victoria 2. I love it so much. Every game, every country in the entire game has a certain political background. There are 5 choices for government. 5? There's the various dictatorships, which come in lots of different flavors. There's absolute monarchy, Prussian constitutionalism, Her Majesty's government, and democracy. Each of these offer the player more or less control in exchange for more or less bonuses. We're an absolute monarchy, and so what this means, we can't enact any reforms because our people don't support them, but we get to pick the ruling party. Why can't we pick the... Oh, we are the conservatives. Derp, derp, derp. We want to so every party has a certain platform that affects the way the game works. First of all, trade policy. Trade policy determines what you can set your tariffs at. Economic policy. This is the big one. So under laissez-faire economics, you can't do anything yourself. You can't do anything except invest in other governments. But you get a significant boost to factory output. It's a lot cheaper for people to build factories, and it sets a ceiling on your tax rate. The output boost alone is worth it. It's so worth it once your factories are doing very well. Religious policy actually doesn't matter very much. Actually, it looks like here that pluralism actually changes research. Oh, plurality, which is different. Religious policy is important to determine which pops are likely to vote for it, but it's not important in any other way in the game. Citizenship policy. This determines who can vote. People either vote for residency or full citizenship or limited citizenship. Finally, we have the war policy. War policy makes mobilization much more difficult. It puts a ceiling on how much you can spend on the military, and it generally makes your military worse. But you get to save a lot of money on your supplies. That's why you would go with an anti-military. So there's different degrees for each of these, and I'm going to explain why we're choosing the National Party. That's why. State capitalism, I decide who gets to build stuff. You'll notice factory owner cost plus 60%. This means that people who aren't me, who are paying for factories, pay more. So it's more expensive for capitalists to get involved, but they can get involved. Let's see what other policies gives us. This will give us a fairly low minimum tariff. We can only go to negative 25%. Moralism, we want to encourage people for a single religious thing. Only people of our primary culture can vote. And we really like war. So we actually pay extra for the military, but we get bonuses to our military. We get faster casus belli. And we get a lot more people when we mobilize. So we're going to go ahead and change to them. And then we can't change it again for a year. Right now, we don't have voting in our country. You'll notice political form, no voting. Which means only we get to pick the ruling party. Later on, different reforms can be chosen that change the way things work. And I think we'll talk about this particular part of the game more once we actually can pass a reform, which right now we can. So movements are organic pops decide to join movements either because they want certain things or they don't want certain things. Over time, movements will turn into rebels, and then you can deal with the rebels or even fight them in open combat. We'll talk about this more once we actually have a reason to talk about them. Decisions. This is a big one. Decisions are powerful bonuses or changes to the game that make you stronger. And right now, we're focusing on this one. Every corps of the German Empire, that's North German, must join our confederation. We inherit all of those, and we basically get super huge. And we get a nice bonus to prestige as well. This is going to be our goal for the first quarter of the game, is building the North German confederation. And then we can create Germany later on. So we can either do this by getting people in our sphere or by attacking them and capturing them. So we'll talk about that in the map here. But there's other really good stuff in here too. The Ruhr Boom lasts for 10 years and gives you a pretty sizable boost to economics. Von Moltke's reforms are amazing. They just make you better. They're so good. We need to restore the academia if we're going to... Where's... the other decision might not be visible yet. There's a decision that Germany can take that creates a brand new school. Oh no, I think we actually have to restore the academia before it'll even become visible. We're going to do this now. Yes, we lose 15 prestige, which won't matter that much. But most importantly, we need this to unlock other things later on. So we're going to go ahead and restore the academia right now. It'll mean we actually research a little bit more slowly, but it also means we don't get any penalties. So actually, at the end of the day, we'll actually still get positivism faster. I think... Oh, and then release nations. You can choose to release nations. Either as a satellite... and we might do that later on, just for fun. But for now, we're not going to bother with that. This is plurality. The more successful we are, the higher up your pluralism will go. This is revanchism. This is when we don't have cores and they belong to another country. This will tick up over time, and it can be a very scary way. This is the trade screen, and it's mostly entirely useless in the beginning of the game because until there's actually been market activity, it's hard to tell exactly how things are going to work. But you can specify that certain goods are really important. I want to buy them. So if you turn off automate, the AI thing disappears and you can decide how much of it you want to buy. There are reasons to do this, and if you want to get super involved in the metagame of economics, you can choose what to buy, when to buy it, how much to buy. I find the AI generally does a fairly decent job with this, and I generally don't mess with it. But you have the option to do so. And there are reasons to do it. I just don't find it to be that crucial in the beginning of the game. So the trade screen basically tells you what's happening to the stuff that you're making. Is it going to the common market is the global market. Wait, no, the common market... Oh, yeah, this is how much is available to your specific country. Let's sort by availability. Coal, we get all of our coal plus a portion of our... Yeah, the common market's your local market. I don't know why I thought it was the global market. So we get all of our coal production, and we're exporting. We have so much that we're actually exporting some. And that shows you the different things that we're making. And this is our stockpile. And this is, generally speaking, market activity, which talks about changes in price or cost. So how much time do we have left in the episode? We only have about 5 minutes. I'm going to skip Pops for now, because it needs to be the focal point of an episode. We might even spend an entire episode talking about it. So I'm going to skip right to diplomacy, and then we'll talk about the rest of this later on. So, because we have some diplomatic decisions to make here too. The first tab shows you the 8 great powers. We're number 4. In the beginning of the game, the way the game is structured, every great power can ally with one other great power, and then there's a finite number of alliances with lesser great powers. So who do we want most on our side? This is going to be an important part of our early decisions as a nation. Russia is a very tempting friend because they've got a great big army, and we're going to be fighting Austria at some point. So I think we will click on Russia. Would you accept an alliance with me? You won't. So once you find out that they won't accept something, you can find out why. They just don't like us enough. Oh, and there's political considerations, because we actually have Polish cores. They might not like us too much for that. So we could spend a lot of time improving our relations. Chances are Russia would still tell us no. What about the UK? The UK would accept. And we don't want the UK helping France. So I think we're going to go ahead and make this our first decision. The UK is now our ally. So everything you do costs diplomatic points, and you get a certain amount during the game. Mecklenburg is, I believe, in our sphere. Let's quickly click on the sphere button. Yeah. There's literally no reason not to ally with countries in your sphere. You kind of have it already. Done. Hesse-Darmstadt, done. Even Switzerland. I don't plan on attacking Switzerland. Why not have an alliance? Now we need to make sure that we're correctly... so let's talk about the other diplomatic actions next, and then we'll talk about how to change your sphere. So, form an alliance. We can call them into wars, and they can call us into their wars. The UK is a good counterbalance, and I think this is the right choice for us. You can call the ally. You can ask for military access or give it. This is pretty standard. You probably understand this already. Increase relations. Another country will like you more, and you can spend some of your diplomatic points on that. We get 3 points. We get 6 points each day, or each month. We can decrease relations because you can't declare war on another country you've got strong relations with. You can subsidize them in war. You can declare war on them if you have a casus belli. This is also a screen to take you to tell you where you get your casus belli. We can take over a puppet's units. And these all involve the great power stuff. So basically your goal is to get to 100 influence in any one country. That allows you to increase your relations with it. Your opinion, up until finally adding them to your sphere. You can harm other great powers so that they lose power. Or you can simply try to improve your... Oh, here's justify war, derp. And then you can either add them to your sphere or remove them from another sphere. You currently cannot kick people out of your own sphere, but that can happen if you play with some of the mods. So we need to find out who we want in our sphere. Right away, we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of our influence into each one of these countries that's already in our sphere. Because other countries will probably fight us for them, and we want to make sure that we build up a nice, sizable... reserve of political power that we can use to harm them if they get too fussy. So we need to find anything that's North German, and we want them to be in our sphere. So let's find the culture map mode. I know there is one. Don't lie to me. Come on, there's a cultural map mode. Is it the heart? No, that's relations. Damn it, why can't I remember this? Nationality, that's what I needed. So anything in gray we want to be in our sphere. Okay, Mecklenburg is already in our sphere. Okay, so this right away is one of the first things we're going to need to consider, which is how we're going to get Schleswig-Holstein away from Denmark. These are in my sphere. Hanover, there's actually a decision that can be taken by the British that'll actually give it back to us. Already in there. Let's actually look at our sphere, which is a diplomatic map mode. So anything in gray... Oh, this is our claims. We don't want that. We want our sphere. Here we go. So we're really only one country away. We need to get a hold of Holstein somehow. And we need to get Hanover. Is Saxony North German or Saxony South German? I think Saxony is South German. No, not national focus. Damn it, where'd nationality go? I'm sorry. I really need to play this game more. It's been a long time since I played it, and I don't remember where the different buttons are. Here we go. So we don't need Saxony, which is good. So our focus needs to be on getting Holstein from the British, which we should just get by a decision they can take. And we need to get Schleswig-Holstein. Now, we have a couple of options. We could fight Denmark. That's what happened in real life. And Denmark doesn't have any allies right now, so it might not be the worst idea to justify a war. We could have them release a puppet, which Holstein is their puppet, so that's one way we could do it. We could add Denmark to our sphere. And because Spherelings can't have Spherelings, that should basically kick Holstein out. We could tell them to free people. We could tell them to liberate a country. We could just humiliate them. We could dismantle their fortifications. So, infamy is what makes other countries in the world dislike you. And our infamy is weirdly on the... Why don't I see infamy here? Where do they put infamy now? Is that it? No, that's... Yeah, there it is, under politics. When you get to 25, other nations can declare war on you whenever they want to. So typically you want to keep your infamy rather low. Adding Denmark to our sphere would be a really good idea. We could also just try to take Denmark's sphere peacefully. You know what? I promise we try to play a little bit more peacefully. We're going to put this as our top priority. We want to get Denmark to join our sphere. If they do, we'll get Holstein. Holstein will then become free. And we're going to go ahead and start influencing Holstein. Let's also sort by influence. So we're pouring most of our influence into these two nations. And you'll notice different things actually modify it. Your relations with the country, total score, and whether or not you're neighbors. I'm going to go ahead and increase relations with Denmark. So we improve by 15. You'll notice it slightly increases the amount of influence we can have there. And we'll do the same with... oh, not Holstein. Yeah, Holstein. I was thinking of Hanover. We'll get that eventually. Let's go and increase our relations with Hanover. There we go. So that's the political game. We are in pretty good shape, I think, politically, so that we can form North Germany as quickly as humanly possible. And you'll notice all this appears here. It's very easy to see. This all tells us which other countries are getting involved. I don't want... So if you get involved in diplomatic actions against other countries, it actually harms your relations. So we might see how that works out. But I think this is where we'll end the episode. I apologize for running over just a tiny bit. And I apologize in particular that we haven't actually covered pops yet. But that'll be the main focus of the next episode because it's such an important part of the game. But I had to make sure it had plenty of time. And we'll talk about the military in the next episode as well. And maybe unpause the game. I know that's a little radical, but maybe we'll unpause the game. But I hope you enjoyed this first episode. Please let me know if you have any questions down below. You can also post on the Paradox forums. You can comment. You can ping me on Twitter and be like, hey, how does this work of Indian? Or I don't think you're quite right about this. Or I want to restart the debate about how economics works. It's by total score, not by prestige. It hasn't been prestige since Victoria 2's base game. Don't fight me. But yeah, please like, subscribe, comment down below. Thank you very much, as always, for watching. And until next time, this has been Indian, and I bid you good day.